We were at Eureka High together. Yeah, I was born and raised here. I lived in Riverside for a little while, lived in Redding for a little while, but mostly just Eureka.
So you bounced around a little bit.
I bounced around a ton, and I bounced around a ton in Eureka. So
Was that for college when you bounced around to Riverside and stuff?
no, 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 no. I mean, like growing up, I grew up here. And so no, I think just poor family. You move a lot. You're not stable. So
That's the trope, right? Is you kinda just
it's
gotta
the truth.
find your path wherever you can cut
Yeah.
it.
So like, yeah, and then I left here when I was 20. And then was gone until I was 33 and came back. And I've been back about 13 years. So
What made you come back?
I missed my family. I really missed my family. It was partly that, and then partly in 2008 when the economy, we could tell what was going on. By 2006, my husband and I were like, the economy is gonna be toast. Like we're up a creek. Um, but we still couldn't divest ourselves fast enough of we were working in real estate and stuff. We still couldn't get out of it quickly enough. So we just spent basically all of 2007 just losing everything. And then we just were like, we gotta start over. So we had family out here. We're like, we're gonna come back out here. And it was a hard decision because we're like, who moves to Eureka, California to rebuild their life, right? We were like, this is not exactly like a thriving economy. I don't know if this is gonna work, but it's actually been we've done really well here. It's been good. It's been, successful. Raised our kids here, two older kids. Um, yeah. Have we started?
Yeah, are we going? Yeah,
Oh,
we're
we
on.
are?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a nice rolling start.
We're live.
All right.
So you
Yeah.
guys were pretty heavily invested in the market then.
Yeah, we were working with real estate companies, and we were providing small business services, and we just started kind of increasingly working with people that were working in real estate. So as all those real estate companies were going down and going, as all of that started to really occur, we didn't have clients. It was coming apart for us too. So
Now, do you feel like there are some parallels in what's happening today? I wish I would have been a little
absolutely.
older for that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think there is. I mean, me just personally, but take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, I was too young to remember, but I remember my parents talking about the pressure and the stuff that they went through in the 80s when inflation was very high. But I vividly recall it in 2000. We could see that coming down the road in 2000. We sold our house in 2000 because I said, I think the market's about to go. And so we sold it. We sold it in like 2 days. And then, but like I said, when it started to happen again, we could see it in 2006. No, so we just couldn't get ourselves into a position where it wasn't going to hit us really hard too. Um, in hindsight, I mean, it was awful to go through. In hindsight, feel like it gave us a lot of sympathy for people. I worry about the people that are like feel like everybody who's in bad situations got themselves there. Um, yeah, I felt like we were both smart, hardworking, whatever. It didn't matter. It's just there's certain things that are outside your control. So yeah, I think being compassionate to whatever's going on in someone's life. You know,
I think a lot of people are in that situation now
they
where
absolutely are.
they were just keeping their head down, trying to move forward, and then all of a sudden you take a breath and you look up and
This is outside people's control. Inflation
yeah,
is outside of our control. Gas prices, you know, uh, a stagnant market. I know the Fed is talking about trying to slow down, how fast wages are increasing, which is just bonkers to me because wages have been flat for so long that really I kind of see it as kind of a correction, like a market correction almost. But again, different opinions.
do you think we're heading towards a recession? Some people would argue
Oh, I
we're
think we're
already
in
in
it.
one.
I think
Yeah.
we're in it because, and even in 2008, they were just, even in 2008, the most they would give you is they'd say the Great Recession. I mean, people were stacking stuff on their car if they still had a car and driving out of wherever they were at. And like, we've come up with ways to kind of pad and print money and do other things to kind of prevent something that looks depression like. So that we don't have to call it that word and say that, anybody had a depression on their watch. Um, because it's all optics, I think. But when it comes down to like, what are people actually living? Uh, people are going through, I think, kind of hell right now. 2 years of it, a few years of it. So, and it's getting much harder, in my opinion. Watching everybody. Um, no, it's not just my opinion. We've got the numbers on it. No, we have numbers on it. We know, for every time there's as these different things move, then it's you have more people that kind of fall off the cliff, right? They're on the edge and off they go, and more people that were further back are now closer to the edge, and it's not good.
That's a good way to put it, is you're walking up to this edge,
It's not
and the
good.
further away we go from it, the more people fall off.
Yep. Yep.
There's a weird hesitation to not call it a recession right now.
And there is, and there was in 2007
Is
and
that a panic
2008.
thing? You just don't wanna freak out the public?
I think that's part of it. I mean, always, like people talk about the market as though the market is kind of this very logical sort of thing, like it's a bunch of people sitting in there with their, clipboards and notebooks looking at, and instead that it's not this like largely testosterone fueled kind of, and monstrosity, of everybody's on Red Bull or something, like it's kind of intense. So I think
That's
there's
how I'm getting by over here.
I think there's some like disreality, unreality, I don't know what the word would be, about, how all of that's fluctuating. But part of that is, again, going back to optics. It's optics.
Well, it's a political football, and one
Absolutely.
that shouldn't be. It's
Well,
whatever party's in power. If you say, "Oh, we're in a recession," well, then now it's attributed to your
because
party.
and see, and that gets back to that a lot of people don't understand how economics works. Um, and so they think that if it's bad right now, that's because, and they just go, you. So it's maybe not understanding how things are cyclical and how things kind of you can have years of contributing factors that lead up. It doesn't mean that the person that is currently president, I mean, there's so many levels between us and the president. There's so many people employed, working, doing things that are affecting the government, not to mention the Fed, which is its whole other thing. So anyway, um, no one wants to say it because then it's going to be, and it is being blamed, right, on the current administration. But the actions that are getting us where we are now have been in the works for a really long time.
People have been calling for a recession for a while now.
Yeah.
They've said that we're in a bubble, the housing market's in a bubble, and then it
Mhm.
just life kept going. The
Yeah.
ball kept rolling,
Yeah.
and then COVID really, I think, kicked things into a bad direction.
Yeah. I really thought things were going to happen faster. So, I told,
In
m-
terms of decline.
in terms of like so I knew the supply chain was going to fail. We talked about that and we were like, okay, this is going to cause a supply chain failure. But I thought, you know, by April of 2020. I thought it was gonna be much faster, but again, it was kind of more, we saw kinda hiccups in the supply chain, but it kind of kept going, but when we're seeing issues and, my husband and I adopted a little boy, out of foster care that's 3 years old now, can't eat, or lost his ability to eat, and so has special formulas. It took us 5 months to get the formula that he needed, so, there's, there's gaps in places, but you have to kind of be in a situation where you're going to kind of encounter those gaps. Not everybody's encountering them depending on what their circumstances are.
The formula shortage was another big one, just
It's still
across the
happening.
board. It's still a
It's
problem.
still an issue. It's and that there is another issue, right? If the news isn't talking about it, then nobody knows about it. So, I mean, unless they're living it. So yeah, it's still problematic. It's stressful.
Do you think that it's an accountability thing that nobody just wants to step up to the plate and say, "Okay, this is the problem. We have to address it. If we can't even call it a problem, how do we fix that?"
I don't know. I don't know because I mean I've volunteered with different people and I've worked in lower levels of government. I feel like a lot of people are very eager to kind of take action and get things done, but very often there's like a complex system there's a complex rules about how things have to be done, and that usually is where people run into problems is they can't move as quickly as they want to because there's regulations that prevent them from moving as quickly as they want to. Um
The bureaucracy.
yeah.
That's what everybody points to.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's a lot of people that are um would just, like let's do this now. But yeah, you know.
Do you think it's a good thing that we have those hoops, or are some of them unnecessary?
Well, the hoops exist usually because somebody has exploited something before the hoops were there. And so, I was thinking about that the other day. Like, how many of our laws exist just because we're trying to kind of regulate or kind of trying to curb greed, avarice, whatever, these other kinds of problems? Probably almost all of them. So, I mean, a lot of laws and rules are not necessarily for people who are going to be ethical, kind, honest, whatever. We create these to try to kind of create safeguards and protections. And then they end up being kind of slow.
Abused.
Yeah, and they slow us down and they become problematic even when you're trying to do something important. So, and we're running into that a little bit, here in Eureka, trying to kind of get things moving with different like housing and stuff like that. It's tricky.
Housing's a big problem.
Oh,
Housing
and
is a big
and
problem.
again, people are like upset about it in the last, 5+ years. People are starting to get really upset about it. But the shortage really started 30 years ago, right?
And you're just feeling those
You're
effects
feeling
now.
it now. And that's the thing is it's like not people, it's not popular necessary to plan for 10, 20, 30 years down the line. And there's a lot of disincentive, particularly for politicians to plan for things 10, 20, 30 years down the line because they're not going to get points for that right now. Um, but yeah, California, this shortage is here because that building that needed to happen wasn't happening because there was kind of this like we don't want to grow, we don't want these people in our backyard, we don't want to NIMBYism kind of run amok for like 20 plus years, and now it is, and it's just become more and more of a crisis for like probably 10 straight years. I mean, even by the time we moved back, so we moved back here in 2008, late 2008, started looking for a place to live in about 2009 early. Stayed with family up until then. It was ridiculous. I couldn't believe how hard it was to find a place. It wasn't like that when I left in 95. I'm trying to remember when I left. So just it changed.
You used to be able to buy a duplex for 100 grand.
I I made $10 an hour and rented a really nice 2-story townhouse here in Eureka and had plenty of money left over. We went out practically every night. My friends and I did. So yeah,
That is so crazy hearing that
I know,
now.
I know. Let me take a sip.
I think it's just crazy how times change like that.
Yeah, no, I'm mad for everybody that's younger too. Like the house that we bought. So we moved into this house 5 years ago, and we bought it 3 years ago. Um, and part of the reason why we bought it is because it had been split. It's a big Victorian that had been split into a legal duplex, and we knew our kids were not gonna, they're not gonna be able to move out. Like they couldn't move out. There's no way to really. It was like if they do that, how are they gonna do these other things? And so we're like, this has an apartment upstairs. They can live with us, but not live with us.
Little separation, which
Yeah, a
is
little bit of
nice.
separation because they are in college. They are college aged, but like this will also kind of like, kind of help be us kind of helping and pitching in while they're, in college. That was part of why we did it. And, but yeah, both of our kids were like, this sucks. Like, not that they don't love us, but like, they don't want to like have to stay with us. But we're like, don't feel bad.
There's kind of two lines of thinking with that. You have the camp that says, yeah, we need to help the younger generation because they're kind of getting screwed over.
They are.
And then you have the camp that says, well, I did it back in my day.
No, they
I could
didn't.
work a job
No, they didn't.
and survive.
No, they didn't. No, they didn't. Because, yeah, no, I mean, we have like the numbers on that. We have like the statistics on that, right? Like, how my neighbor who's really become like my mentor, right? She's a retired attorney. She's just incredible. She had 2 children and she worked part time and put herself through law school without debt. Like, I
How
can't.
crazy is that?
No, I have no concept because that wasn't a possibility even for my age group. So I'm not a boomer. I'm an X, right? I'm the group that people are like, oh, you guys exist. Like I think I've met like 2 others. Like there's a tiny group of people, but yeah, no, it's that's it's
Oh,
not
we're
true.
going we're going in.
Yeah, no, because
Cap's going back on.
no, it's just very frustrating to me because again, that goes back to people not understanding economics, right? Well, I was able to do it. Yeah, well, of course, because this amount of pay when things only cost this much, but when you have this amount of pay and it now costs this much, it's you can't. It's different. It's a different situation. It doesn't. It's ridiculous. It's just shifted dramatically. And everybody who's under a certain age knows this. It's a frustration, right? Like I hear like my daughter's age group and son's age group are just super frustrated about their grandparents' age group because they're like, do they not have any concept of what happened? And I think a lot of them don't. They just really think like younger people are lazy and don't want to work. And I'm like, yeah, they have like 2 and 3 jobs. Like that's just not a thing. Um,
That's kinda how I feel about student loans in some
oh,
regard,
yeah.
is there's that sentiment of, "Yeah, I worked a part-time job and came out debt-free. I did that, you can do it. Just work a job."
Yeah. Just work a job and part-time and make $56,000 a year and cover your tuition or whatever. I mean, like, it's it's not a thing.
Do you think
Depends on the
that
school.
the housing problem can be solved here? Because it's
Not
big
quick
throughout
not
California.
quickly. Not quickly. Not unless there was if there was, I think, the will to do it fast. So I think it depends on priorities, right? So California right now and Eureka as well are both saying, "Hey, we're running a surplus." And I'm like, "Hey, California, you cut services to adults with disabilities like crazy, like slash and burn them, right? And a lot of stuff kind of shrunk and closed over this last few years. So I kind of like feel like you can't really say there's a surplus if there's like an extreme need going unmet. And I would like say that that's true probably with like housing and some of these other things too. There's like extreme needs going unmet. Uh, uh yeah, I think it's priorities. I think there's kind of an attitude of that group that's getting the shaft, that younger group that's getting the shaft, aren't big voters.
Really, that seems to go against the narrative,
That's
though.
starting to change. That's changed a lot. I think, this last 5, 6 years, changed how interested people are in, um, what's happening at these kinda larger state and federal levels. But by and large, I think it's still the older retired generation that votes the most by a long shot. I
Yeah,
don't
that is
I
true, right? It's the older demographic that's
and
more
I haven't
stable.
looked recently, but I think that's true. You can kind of look at it's like scalable, right? You can kind of look at like younger groups and older groups and you kind of see it just kind of goes up like as they age and they kind of are like, "Oh, hold on, I care about this stuff." And.
So in trading out these problems, are you talking about special programs like funding for special needs people or
Yeah,
programs like that that are kinda
right.
getting put on the back burner?
Yeah, it just the overall amount of funding. If I understand correctly, the overall amount of funding and some of the programs and just here were also reduced. And so that kind of had my daughters worked with. She was a gymnastics coach and worked with kids, and she often got kind of the more challenging kids because she's patient and you know,
Double-edged
nice.
sword.
She can speak Spanish, she can sign, she can do all, so she just kind of was this like, "Hey, I can kind of take all these kids that other people were like, I'm not sure how to work with this child." And so then she ended up working with Car here. And they were just they work with disabled adults and they were pretty impacted during the pandemic. And part of that was they couldn't safely go meet with their clients, right? Because some of these clients were older and there was a lot of like, hey, like this just isn't safe. And, they were trying to figure out kind of how to protect that group from COVID too. But nevertheless, I think they had like 2 or 3 facilities. So I feel like at this point I need to have Kate sitting here so I can make sure I know what I'm talking about. But I know that this was something that we saw some kind of reductions in and anyway. So back to housing though. I think we could probably, if we had the will to do it, we could do it really quickly. I worry with Cal Poly coming in, people already have a lot of difficulty finding housing. Certain percentage of their student body
What about that
is
big
always
land
homeless.
that they just purchased for housing?
Well, it's not going to solve it today. It's not going to solve it next week, and that's my concern. Right? Is that the enrollment's already higher this year, and it's going to be higher next year, and they're going up. And my only worry about that is I think is great. I think that's going to be great long term for this area too. And I think that'll be great for the college as well. It's just my only concern is like, hey, where are they going to go? Like this is the age of my kids. I hate seeing
It hits a little closer to
it
home for
does.
you.
I don't want to see them going through that. Like I don't they're trying to like better their lives, have these goals and come up here and find out that they can't find a place to rent or they get exploited by, I mean, the absolutely astounding number of slummy places that we have here, high rent, won't repair, just the stuff that people go through here. It's frustrating.
I've heard a lot about the slumlord atmosphere.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we dealt with that. When we got out here, we rented all the way up until, like I said, this house. So we had some ridiculous stuff, as renters.
Do you think you could solve that through legislation, or is that just motivating people to actually care?
I mean, I think there's lots of different ways to probably tackle this issue. So, like, Um, I think the city is really working on a lot of that already. Like they are really engaged, and I think the issue is that a lot of people don't realize how many projects they're engaged in and how they've been trying to tackle this problem because it does take time to get stuff done, but they are engaged in a lot of projects. Yeah, so 20 years ago, 21 years ago, when we were out in Utah, and that was where I got elected to represent an area out there. My husband was out there going to college, and we had a slumlord, same kind of area that I'm actually running for right now. Same kind of thing. We lived downtown. We had business district. We had high density housing, and we kind of had like the poor area and then students. And we had a slum lord issue there as well. And so the way the city kind of tackled it then was that they looked into doing like a licensing basically where people would go out and kind of so you had to pay a licensing fee, basically ran it as, a business, which I think they already have stuff like this going on here. And but that basically paid for people to come and quickly kind of take a look and because we had some odd things that were going on out there, similar to some really strange rental situations here.
in
Like
terms of
one time, one of the places they went out to go and inspect had converted what essentially used to be like a coal chute into like a micro apartment, but it really wasn't a micro apartment. It was just this.
I don't know what a coal chute is.
Yeah.
I'm thinking, how big is this where they could convert it into an
I mean,
apartment?
it's not big. That's the thing. And this place had no one had bathrooms, so it was just a ramshackle. But, yeah, like, a coal chute would be, like, tiny. It was a place where they were storing their coal to, like, power this it was a very large house that had been just split into, like, a zillion units. So, they just needed to make sure weird things like that weren't happening, and that was how they addressed it. So, I don't know what they've got in place here because the more I learn, the more I realize there's more to know. So, but yeah, I think there's multiple ways that can do. As far as solving housing here,
It's not gonna be a quick fix.
it's not gonna be a quick fix. It needed because it's just the bigger the project, the longer. The bigger the amount of things that you need to do, it just takes longer. They had a housing problem in that place where we lived in the 70s, and the way that resolved that was they encouraged everybody to convert everyone out there. It's a desert, had root cellars. They were like, "Hey, we will have these." I think they did like low or no cost loans. Their city did out there and did these different things and said, "Convert these into apartments so that you can rent them." So really, like every house out there had these basement apartments, and that was one of the ways, along with building apartment complexes, that they solved it. Was they just encouraged everybody to open their homes, like figure out a way to put a rental in the backyard, convert your garage, whatever, like get this going so that there's housing. I think they're trying to do that here as well, accessory dwelling units.
That's been a big push
It's a big
throughout the
push,
state.
but and Natalie Arroyo has talked about this a little bit too. Some of the problems that they've run into though with it is that it's hard to get financing to do that. So you almost just kind of like need to have like the money just hanging out to like
Incentivize it.
yeah, because we looked into we thought we could get rid of this garage in the back and build, something. And we have this unused garage that we have. We have this unused garage that we have in the back. And so we're like, hey, let's see if we can maybe put something. But it would be so expensive because the materials are and here we go with the supply chain
Back to
thing.
inflation.
Back to inflation, back to supply chain, back to how much does it cost to transport things into this area so then we're particularly impacted by the cost of goods because it's even higher than even just a few hours south. And so, yeah, we were like, this just doesn't pencil. So even though they've they've really tried to like open it up where it's easier for people to build these dwelling units, it's still there's these barriers to it.
It's cost prohibitive still.
Yep.
What do you make of the idea of turning some of that commercial real estate into mixed use?
I love it.
You think that's a
Yeah,
good
I'm
idea?
stoked. Yeah, I'm stoked. Yeah, and they asked this question at the we did one at oh shoot.
The League of Women Voters.
League of Women Voters. Yeah, thank you. I have a 3-year-old. He doesn't sleep. I don't sleep.
I
So
get it.
cognitive processing low. So yeah, there's a they brought that up there and I think somebody said like, well, we can't just take these people's properties from them. That's not what it is. What they're talking about though is like purchasing, these properties are just kind of sitting. Because uh, unfortunately, online buying and stuff like that too has really impacted, uh, it's really impacted Main Street, so to speak, right? And so there are some businesses that cannot probably come back because they can't be competitive in what's happened and how things have changed. So what I would like to see, right, is how many businesses can we get back in here? How many, like back in that, our downtown Eureka, like what can we do? But for all these other places that are just sitting there, I'm like, let's convert them, like let's convert them. It's going to take like so many different, I think, approaches because even though I'm not going to drop $110,000 to build an accessory dwelling unit in my backyard or plus 110,000 plus, somebody else can and will. So that's one route, even though I'm not going to build a great big whatever 40, door complex, somebody else will. So I think like having it just has to be gone at from multiple different directions and I think we're going to see a big difference. I think we're going to start to feel relief over probably the next 5 years, and I think there'll be a big relief by 10, 10 years out, but I'm like, in the meantime
Is that because of a housing crash or
no, no, I mean,
the
I think
multi-approach and
it's
building
yeah, it's
stuff
gonna
out?
it's we're gonna start to feel that that's working and that's catching up and that it's, that that's alleviating, and I mean and again, they're moving on things very quickly, like, if you drive around and you kinda look, they've got something going over at Cooper's Gulch, like, they have a lot of things in the works, and so they're really tackling this, I think just a lot of people for some reason are not aware of just how engaged the city is in solving this. They are. So,
Well, I think Cooper's Gulch is a senior living,
it
right?
is
Okay.
senior and we have another one that's senior as well. And so again, so it's like, yeah, there's so the state kind of says like, hey, this is I think it's called RENA or something. Anyway, the acronym, but the state kind of says like this is how many units we think that you need to have and you need to do and this kind of thing. And we have some kind of issues that are kind of gonna be challenging here. One of which is the state is saying that we are going to shrink here. They're anticipating we are gonna really shrink over
Eureka or Humboldt County as a whole?
both that they think that we're gonna and there is kind of this kind of at a state level, kind of this like, hey, these rural areas are really just they're gonna shrink.
That's ironic. Who's coming up with
I
that?
don't know. I don't know. But I know that that's a thing. And I got to meet with Tom from Epic. I hope it's okay. I'm name dropping him. But anyway, and I was asking questions and he was kind of talking with me a lot about the housing, kind of like some of what we're kind of running into. And I'm like, and he and I both are like, no. This we've consistently been gaining and we will continue to consistently gain. And I think there's a few reasons for that, but one of them is I can't tell you how many people I've met that I call them heat refugees, but like and there's probably that have left from other areas down south that are just like could not stand it anymore. They're like it's crowded, it's scorching and it's expensive. And so I think if you build it, they will come. I think there's probably a lot of people that are like, if they could make a life here, they'd be here in a second. And I think there is, I think we're going to keep moving this way because it's not hot as the blazes.
And it's beautiful. The
It's
scenery here is
beautiful.
incredible.
There's lots of outdoor things to do. Um, there's lots of things to, I think to draw people here. Um,
That's funny. I haven't heard anybody say we're gonna start shrinking.
yeah, no, and no, because I don't think normal people or average people, just
People that
normal,
actually live here,
these
yeah.
abnormal politicians, no. But I mean, like, no, I think people here are like, no, we're growing. Like, we're growing. And there's some things that have shrunk, right? I mean, there's way less kids in school than there was when I was going to school. So, I mean, but again, I mean, I think younger people are like, I can't afford to move out of my mom's back bedroom. I'm not going to have kids. So it's just changed things.
Well, I think it's harder keeping local kids here,
Yep.
right? Kids that grow up, go through college, and then come back. That seems to be rare.
Yep. So my yeah, I came back and people are like, why'd you come back? And I was surprised that a lot of people stayed. I thought everybody pretty much left because we did what was here for us. There was everything had changed. Even the economy really started to really flounder when I was it founder or flounder? Anyway, but flounder is the fish. Which one is it?
I think it's flounder, right?
Is it flounder?
I
I
think
feel
it's
like it's flounder. I feel like it's flounder.
I think it's flounder. I think you got it.
Let's just delete this part. But but anyway, yeah, like it really started to in the 90s when I was in high
Started to
school.
tank.
Yeah, because our industries they couldn't continue, right? At the level that they were, the fishing and logging industries couldn't continue at the level that they were. Um, but my parents were employed through the logging industry. So, I mean, it had a huge impact. So I think there was kind of like a, just move on. But yeah, my son is out in Florida. He just left and is out there studying astrophysics, actually. So, and my daughter's here, but is planning on probably becoming a dentist. And so she'll leave too. There isn't any place to go to school here for that.
Yeah,
So
there's not a lot of
I don't know.
opportunities.
No, down the line. So she wants to come back. I mean, she loves it here. She wants to come back, but she's gonna have to leave. So I think a lot of times, like, even if kids want to stay here and make a life here, they can't. And I would like that to change. Like, I really would like that to change. I think it can too.
Do you think the solar farm and that cable that they're laying out in the Pacific, do you think all that is gonna make an impact job-wise here? Or is it
I
gonna
mean,
help? Or the fish
yeah.
farm out there in Samoa?
Yeah, I mean, it looks like they're gonna move forward with that. I know some people have, like, mixed feelings on that because 'cause they're concerned about, like, the affluent line and how that might, like, introduce viruses to, like, other like, I was kinda reading up on kind of, like, environmental concerns with that and stuff, but it seems like by and large, a lot of people are also very favorable toward it, and I can't remember what they estimated would be the jobs that would be coming in, but they are estimating that would create a certain number of jobs. Um, I don't know how many that is and how impactful that would be. I mean, everything's helpful, right? I mean, it's like, again, I think jobs are probably a lot like housing where it's like lots of things. And it's kind of like an upward spiral or downward spiral, right? If you have a couple of like good core things, then you have lots of other little businesses to start to form around it to support those things. Um, so I think anything coming in that isn't going to be, harmful would be good employment wise because then we'll have other things. Like my mom worked at the mill. My stepdad worked at a hydraulic company that catered to the mill. You have these when the mill went, then eventually the hydraulic company went. So you have like a lot of little, you know, I don't know. Economies are kind of like uh, ecosystems in a lot of ways. They just
Especially in
kind of
rural
trail up and
areas
trail
like
down.
this. If you
Yeah,
lose the big fish,
yeah. So we need more big fish. Cow poly's a fish, a big fish.
a lot of people are upset though at Cal Poly
Hmm.
and of buying up that land, which I don't really understand. Is it just where they bought the land, or is it
I don't
they
know.
just don't like the idea of the school expanding in that way?
I don't know either. I haven't really oops. I haven't been paying attention to um what's going on with Cal Poly's land purchase that they did. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I got to dig into that a little more. I didn't understand. I've read a few articles where it shows that people are not happy about it, and I couldn't really figure out if it's just from a perspective of where they're building or they just don't like the idea that the school's expanding in that way.
Oh, hold on. Okay. Yeah, no, I'm trying to remember what that is. It was like it's is it because it's kind of like ice there isn't like a clear.
I thought it was like a wetland thing, but I don't know.
Yeah,
Can you
no,
see if
I'm
you can
like all
find
of a
something on
sudden I'm like,
Cal
hang
Poly
on, wait
housing?
a minute. Now I remember people discussing this. I mean, the thing is we live in an area that's extremely pristine and
People don't like messing that up.
no, and I don't want to either. I don't want to either. And so it's like, how do you balance that? Like, how
There
do
is
you
that argument of how do you expand and still maintain the small town feeling.
well, the thing is we have like 34, 40 million people in California, something like this. Um, our population is getting huge. It's gonna get bigger. It's not just the state, it's the entire country. That's the whole world at a just phenomenal rate. I can't remember what it was when I was born.
It's definitely bigger now.
Like half, right? The world was like half the size. So I think like, I understand that this kind of like how do we kind of you don't want to just decimate your entire environment. Like this is bad. You don't want
What
to
do
do
you
that.
think of speaking do you have anything here
But
for us, Andy?
some areas though are more environmentally sensitive than
Yeah,
others.
wetlands
And
are the
that's
big
the
one.
thing there's some areas that are environmentally sensitive more so than say up on a hill in a forest. And so some things just really uh, we have to be really careful with.
What do you got here? Did you find anything about some I don't remember. I think it might maybe it was a wetlands thing. I don't know if I'm attributing that to
I don't know what
that
I'm
guy
looking.
that's out there
I'm like
building
I
out
don't know what I'm looking at here.
a map of
Yeah.
the yeah,
I
it's
feel
just
like
their
I'm
project.
not one of those people that's great at reading maps. Like I almost need like a holograph. Like,
Yeah,
here,
just
let me
break it down. Give me the
yeah.
quiz notes,
Like,
right?
yeah, just let me step into it for like a minute and look around. But
Speaking of impact, one of the questions that I really did like in that League of Women Voters was on that that homeless encampment that they had built up over on 6th and
Yeah.
West Ave.
Yeah.
What is your take on that? Because people were very divided on if they should be removed, if they should stay.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I'm like trying to remind myself, like, I'm running for office, which means that I am applying for a job, right? The world's longest, most intense job interview. But,
Well, it's hard because
um,
nobody has a great solution to that. So where do you
well, okay, so I thought about that, right? Because Eureka, I talked with people and they were like, we tried to do some kind of camping, because the solution would be until we have housing, then they have to have a place to safely be, except for, and because there's two different issues, right? The people were talking about environmental impact and then they were talking about criminality and, other things like that. Okay, those are two separate things. And so, and I said bluntly, no, I wasn't in favor of that. I thought I know it's a terrible spot, right?
the
Yeah,
environmental impact was insane. I
it was
Googled some of those
bad.
pictures. It was insane the
It
amount
was
of trash they
terrible
had
because
back
there's no
there.
place to throw away the trash. There's no place to throw away the trash. There's no place to go to the bathroom. Um, One of the things I said was we've criminalized homelessness because if there's no place for you to legally be, then that means anywhere you're going is illegal. Any place you're sleeping,
Where do you go?
where do you go? And we don't have a place for them to go. So we can't tell them not to go places if we don't have some place for them to go. It'd be different if there was there was an option and immediately people will say, well, some of them choose to be homeless. Okay, fine. But a lot of them don't. There's other things going on. Yeah, so again, uh oof, I know it's hard. I just think I'm always going to put people ahead of anything. It's just always going to be people ahead of everything else for me. Ahead of, you know,
Everything.
everything.
What about the
Everything
argument
always.
that it's more detrimental for them to be in that spot?
Oh, well, it is detrimental. It is detrimental. And I think one of the things they've talked about is this kind of like, and I'm sorry, I can't recall exactly the terminology people have used for it, but essentially the idea is an approved place to camp. I mean, which basically boils down to like what they used to call Hoovervilles, right? During the first
Yep.
depression. These Hoovervilles, which also just,
Or terrible.
they are terrible, but
At least they have a place where they can be, I guess. You could make that argument.
least
Yeah.
worst until we have ways to address that in some ways, least worst. And so there's, um, yeah, I mean, I think ultimately everyone who wants to be in homes needs to be in places. They need to have shelters. So I think we need to move forward on shelters. Kim Burgell, I don't know if I just said her last name correctly, but she and I talked about some of this. We both have very similar feelings about people that are houseless. I'm not sure what the distinction is between houseless and homeless,
I don't get
honestly.
that. Yeah, I
I'm not
just
sure
call them
what I
homeless.
have always called them homeless too, and I think some people have decided that that's offensive. But to me, a house is just a structure. A home is a place where you feel like you're safe and you belong. And so I feel like saying that they are homeless fits still because they're unwanted. I can't go into it too much. I'm like, I don't want to blubber on your like thing, but I'm like, "N- we're throwing away human beings.
It's a very nuanced problem because we're
Yeah.
dealing with people that don't have anything.
There's lots of reasons why they're there. There's lots of reasons why they're there. And even for people, they're like, well, they don't want to be in a home. Again, there are lots of reasons why things like that happen. Um, I
But what do you do in that situation? Like if somebody
Well, there's so many people involved in that because if it's a criminal issue, you address it from the criminal angle. If it's a mental health issue, we have to why do we have so many things in place for how to address when someone breaks the law, but we don't have stuff like that if someone is having a mental health crisis? Like we know exactly who to call when somebody is breaking the law, but we don't know exactly, people don't know exactly who to call if someone is in an open, noticeable crisis. Anyway, so I think part of that is just like as a society, we kind of have more of like a punitive. We're very hands off generally, and then punitive when we need to be. And I think really what we need to be is building people, building people, building people, because then we have less in this group. And so I think it's addressing each of those things. I know that sounds kind of, whatever, big, but there's lots of different issues that are working into that. but you have a lot of people with broken lives, and some of that's addiction, but even addiction so often is,
It's a traumatic response.
yep,
You're dealing with trauma and you're masking it with whatever
yeah.
substance you can get your hand
And,
on.
and I remember when opioids were being handed out like candy back in the 90s to all of these people who were working and logging and different things because they were getting hurt. They were injuring their backs and things like that. And they were saying, like, these don't form habits, these don't form addictions, and they'll help with this pain. And these guys, these big old guys, were in tons of pain, right? I mean, they were a huge amount pulling green chain and doing these different jobs that were super high injury. And fishing and logging, high injury professions, high fatality professions. And so I think a lot of people, I can't remember what the numbers are, and I don't know if this has changed because I haven't looked at it in probably at least 5 years, but I know that the numbers used to be something like 7 out of 10 people who got hooked on opioids. It started as prescriptions from their physician. And I think people need to remember that. I think people really need to remember how some of this started. Um, and um, and then also, you know, um, we've worked with foster kids for about 10 years. Um, and I've worked with youth and teens for a lot longer than that since I was in high school. My first volunteer job was with Planned Parenthood. They used to have this program called Enable. It was like Education Now, Babies Later, and they had high school students go and talk with kids at junior high because they were concerned about how many junior high school kids were getting sexually involved. They're super young. It's very young. So they were like, we've got like 25% of these kids are, sexually involved. I don't know what it is now, but so they sent us out, kind of like talk to these kids and stuff like that. So I've been working with kids for like just ages. So that's kind of the backdrop to something I'm going to say. The amount of trauma and the amount of people that are homeless that go through the foster care system or that were traumatized or trafficked. We have a lot of trafficking in this area of minors, a lot of abuse. Those kids end up on the street. And I've seen some of them on the street here. So, yeah.
It's a problem. I mean, all of that is scary. I'm sitting over here, I'm kind of hung up on the trafficking thing because I have heard that,
Yeah.
but it's hard because I haven't seen it. So you have that
Why would you see it?
and you have that degree of separation so you can
Why would you
acknowledge
see it?
that's the thing.
The whole point of trafficking is that it happens underground. The whole point of it is that you don't see it. That's the point. So, yeah, I mean, but Humboldt County has a problem with it.
But it makes it hard to address when it's not in your face, when it's not something people can see and
Well,
have that
here's
tangible effect of, oh, this is a real problem.
well, here's the thing, right? Is so two things I want to say is one is that we have a really nice charity here that works with foster children called the Forgotten Initiative. It's called the Forgotten Initiative because these kids are forgotten. They're invisible. So that number one, and they are at much higher risk. And then number two, so I just attended the missing and murdered Indigenous persons summit that the Yurok tribe hosted. And and one of the things, something that's important to remember too is Native Indigenous people are at way higher risk of being trafficked and disappearing, girls, particularly women. In our area, for example, about 40% of the kids that end up in foster care are Indigenous children, even though they're a small fraction of the population. Those children are targeted. And they talked about this in the conference. And I sat with Rachel Ibarra. She and I sat there, and she actually was one of the people that spoke at the conference. And we were talking about this, and I said, "Hey, I've been a foster parent for 10 years. This issue in particular, I find very troublesome, and I'm very concerned about it." So we were talking about that, and we were talking about how these kids kind of they just disappear. And she said they're targeted, specifically targeted, because no one cares about them. They're kind of invisible. They're kind of forgotten. There's no one keeping an eye on them. And so if they disappear from their foster homes or whatever, then it's kind of like, well, where'd they go? And, because they might come from a broken family, it's not necessarily looking as well, or they get taken from their family. We have something, I don't know if they actually call it poverty placements or if I've kind of just dubbed it poverty placements, but there is a certain number of children that end up in foster care that really are there because of either directly because of poverty or because of an indirect consequence of poverty. And so, shouldn't be there at all. Anyway.
In terms of
So a lot of invisibility is my point.
yeah,
Is
understandably.
these are invisible kids. Y you know, how many something I've talked with people about is, okay, when the Me Too movement hit full swing, right? How many people did you find out in your life were like, "Yeah, me too." Like, how many people did you not realize that kind of were like, "Yep." Because I ask people this question when they're, and it's usually quite a lot, that they're like, they didn't know a mom or an aunt or a sister. They didn't know. So there's that aspect to this as well. Because girls are disproportionately affected by this, there's an aspect of kind of, it's not being discussed. I don't know. I feel like I'm talking around this and but trying to explain something that's really complicated. But it is an issue.
Well, it's like the homeless problem, right? You have these huge problems that affect people on a very real level.
And they're in the bushes. And we get upset when we look into the bushes. And then it's like nobody knew, but then when everybody looks, they're like, "Oh my god, look at all this trash, and look, there's gang signs, like, spray painted on the tree, and, like, what's going on?" And then they're like, "Oh my god, and some of these women were being prostituted, and, this is a mess."
So for that encampment in particular, because there were like
Yeah.
I think there were 30 families living there. What would you have done in that situation?
I think they need to have a place to camp. There needs to be an actual, and this is something people have talked about, there needs to be a legal place for them to go, with, uh so the people that are not criminals and don't have a place to live are is more worried about the criminals than we are because they're the ones that have to live with them, right? I don't necessarily. I'm not the one living 10 feet away. My tent isn't 10 feet away. So, but there, so having kind of, they've talked about making sure that there's, access to facilities, bathrooms, porta potties, whatever, having access to garbage cans, and then having access also to, a patrol where they're coming and checking and they're keeping eyes on things. So, I mean, like, to me, that would kind of be the better than what we have right now. The problem that they've run into is Eureka doesn't have any large chunks of land where they can do something like that. Like their Eureka is very on its own footprint. And that's been one of the tricky parts. Arcata can spread. There's, different people can kind of spread even outside Eureka in the county parts. They can they've got places to spread into, but Eureka really doesn't. So it has to kind of go up, which is why it's gotten into these, parking lots and stuff too, because they're like, where do we have land? Okay, there. So that comes back to that camping thing. So to me, then these are not all citizens of Eureka. So I think I don't know if these discussions have already occurred in talking with the county about providing a parcel like that, but that might be the better way is for the county to try to provide a parcel like that where there is a legal camping scenario. Um, because Eureka doesn't really have the property for it. So, but I would hazard a guess a lot of people's proximity to Eureka or camping in Eureka isn't so much about them being like, well, this is where I was born and raised, so much as it is, this is where services are at. This is where I can get around on foot. This is where I can get to the things I need to.
Now, what
So
do you make of that argument where if we did provide that land, are we just incentivizing people to
come and camp.
yeah, and stay in that lifestyle
I don't
instead of
know.
promoting them to get out of it and change their circumstances?
Well, again, I think, that goes back to people, assuming that everybody that's on the streets are there because they want to be, or because they're just not motivated to have something else in their life. And that's just not true. So, I think, there's addiction issues, there's mental health issues, there's I can't afford to live and my life fell apart issues, and then there's just I don't even know. And and these groups don't necessarily run into that criminal, element that we have to like be concerned about, right? So there's different reasons why people are there. So I don't know. That's always the challenge with anything, right? Is I've heard those kinds of arguments my whole life about anything, right? We don't want to give them food stamps because if we give them food stamps, then they're just not going to work. We don't want to give them, housing vouchers because if we give them housing vouchers, why would anybody work anymore? Well, and yet most of us work, and yet most of us do these things. So I don't think it's a big population. I can't,
And it's growing.
and it's growing, and the number of people that are in crisis is also growing. But I do really think that the measurement of what how we are, with the quality of us as a people and the quality of us as a community. How do we treat the people that are most vulnerable? How do we treat the people that are most vulnerable? My youngest son is never going to be able to live independently, probably. Um, it would be very unlikely. And my husband and I were older when we adopted him. And we're putting all these kind of things in place so that we can make sure that, and our older children are also like, we'll make sure Finn is okay. Like baby brother, he's gonna be good. But what happens when people don't have that? You know? Um, what happens when they don't have
Rookie mistake. I'm over here. My phone's going off.
a safety net? A safety net. Like I was talking earlier about like what happened to my husband and I, right? In 2008, where we really had to start over. Well, we could do that because we had family who could do all of this for us. They could help us out. And we needed help with like everything to really get things pulled back together because we just hung on too long. We were like, no, we can figure this out. We'll just, and it like got ourselves in tons of debt. It was just horrible. It was really stressful. Like this happens to people. But we came out here and it was like, my grandma was like, you can stay with us. I have this extra space and we can do this and they just were like, we only needed to stay with them for about 2 months. But like, what do you do when you don't have that? What do you do? And that's the thing, is it like, so some of these people that are on the streets are people that had homes. Some of them lost, they couldn't afford their in mobile home parks and the rent went up too high and they lost, and it's not like they can just move those and move them where. So they're just choop, and some people are injured and they can't, it's just there's not a lot of room between. Things can go bad very quickly for people. They just can. So
Yeah, I don't know what the right call was with that particular
I don't
encampment.
know either. I feel like
I think you had to get him
something needed to be
out
done. Something
because
needed to be.
the trash was just
Did they
nobody.
have to be out or did it need to be cleaned?
That's a good question.
And that
My problem with it is that I believe there was a camp there a while ago. I don't remember the length. And they went in there and cleaned out an insane amount of trash.
yeah.
And then now we're just in the same spot again.
Yeah.
That's my only gripe is we're
Well,
not fixing the root of the problem.
and that's and so what's going to happen is they're just going to diffuse
And
into
then I don't know, 5 months later they'll be back.
in
And
some
then
other place or that same place, and it'll be the same thing because we keep
we're
doing these
just in a
big cleanups.
cycle.
We're in a cycle and that's why there has to be a like, why this Betty Chen, these other groups are like trying to get this stuff like, okay, let's get them into housing, and they are, and improvements are being made. So like I just went to the mayor had a pie social at the park, and I went to this pie social and I was like, all right. And one of the people that came up, I'm not sure if they're still, I don't think they're houseless, but anyway, he had come up and was talking, and they said, I just want you to know. And they were somebody that had lived on the streets and was like, I just want you to know, I think things have really gotten better in this last few years. I can tell a difference. And this other guy that was sitting next to him, who had not been in his situation, was like, I completely disagree. Things are so much worse. They're, and this kind of thing. And he was like, no, I can see an improvement. And I thought, so here was somebody that's been in that community is saying like, I think I can see an improvement. Like I can tell you guys have been working on this. Like I can see that this is, but I think it's very hard because I think everybody is like, yeah, it didn't look like this. It didn't look like this 20 years ago. It didn't look like this 30 years ago, and I do hear people say like, oh, it's like this everywhere. And I'm like, nope. I have family in other states. We travel. It does not look like this everywhere. California's being particularly hit hard, with some of this. So we're particularly struggling.
Yeah, it's not great. It's not
not
great in
great.
California. It's not great for people who just live and work in these cities. It's not great for the homeless population who is in those circumstances. It's just not great.
It's not good for anybody.
And we keep throwing money at it and it doesn't seem to be solving the problem. That's
Yeah.
what gets me is the frustration of just the repetition.
Yeah. Well, because exactly. But what we can't see is, so each time that they go through and clean out is how have those numbers declined over time? And I think between, it was like 4 or 5 years ago when they did kind of I'm trying to remember what it was. They went through and they kind of were like, how many people do we have? Versus the one that they did maybe 2 years ago. And it was less, right? So there's kind of this there is some movement that's happening and that kind of thing, but again, until you address it up here, you're not gonna address it down there. So I think the answer is probably just so much housing that there's just housing, like that there's just that you have options. I think that it's cheap enough that people but again, it has to be addressed from all sides. And we have a number of things that are causing challenges here, right? We we have a lot of mental health issues here.
What do you got here, Andy? Community rallies against police and green team. Yeah. Can you scroll down? I think there should be some pictures of the trash in this article.
Yeah,
Just keep
no.
going down.
The trash was just, oh my
And the
goodness.
kids protesting, I always chuckle with that because I think their heart is in the right place.
Mhm.
But if you want to help, I don't know, bust these people to a shelter or help clean up some of the trash. You
Well,
standing on the street
that
yelling at
gets
the officers is
that
not.
gets tricky though too because some of the shelter options, some of the places that they have where they can go, um, for obvious reasons because some people are really putting out a lot of effort toward their sobriety, don't allow people who are not sober. So that excludes some of that group. They're not sober yet.
Yeah, to be fair to the trash.
Yeah,
It's
it's brutal.
it's a
Well, and imagine living like that, right? This is one
it's
thing.
not good.
Can you imagine what that does? Just to have you ever just had your room has just gotten too messy and you start to feel demoralized by it?
Yeah.
Like imagine
And look at all the needles. It's
yeah,
just
it's so
nobody
bad.
should have to live in that.
No, they shouldn't. No, and that's the thing is I even saying that hey, I think there needs to be a camp. I'm I can't believe I'm basically saying hey, let's build Hooverville.
Well, hopefully somebody would patrol it and there would be
And
trash
that's to
pickups
me,
and
that's what I would wanna see, right? I would want it to be because that not because I want there to be "Hey, a police presence that can make" but so that people feel safe, so that the
safety.
people yeah, because there are people there that are there for all there are so many reasons why people are homeless. So, being safe, yeah, there has to be. Bathrooms, a dumpster, and again, one of the things and I asked about that because I've met with different people on the council and said, "Okay, what about this? What about this?" And they said, "We tried this and this is what happened. We tried this and this is what happened. We tried this and we can't." And I mean, because they've been trying to do these different things and um, you know, uh, the porta potties were getting knocked over, but they were like, I don't think they didn't think that they were being targeted. So the homeless population also gets targeted. People would go out and harass them in these encampments, hey, this is fun. Let's go knock over the trash can and do these different things. So they're running into stuff like that as well. And then I think a dumpster was lit on fire. And so they're like, well, we can't just keep putting this stuff out there for that. And I'm like, I don't know. Why not? It's not
It's a
gonna
good
happen.
question.
Why not? It's not gonna keep happening. I mean, my neighborhood, cars get broken into, and yet we still park there. And yet we still live there. We have crime, but our neighborhood we didn't just give up on having, it's so part of me feels like, I don't know if that's a great reason to just give up on having dumpsters and porta potties is well, hey, one got knocked over, another one got lit on fire. And I'm like, I mean, yeah, that's obviously a safety issue, but I mean, stuff happens in my neighborhood too. So I don't know. I
I
don't know.
think we're more critical of that community because people don't like to think of the idea that they could be there.
They don't think they can be there. I think we all it's with anything. It's that we human beings do this with everything, right? It's when someone has I've seen this with all kinds of things. Even I saw with COVID, because people wanted to feel like if I just diet and exercise and I'm healthy, then I won't be the one that dies of COVID. So they want to feel like they have control over things. So they don't have to feel afraid. And instead of acknowledging that there's a lot of things that are out of our control, things can happen. And I think that's where that push to blame people for their circumstances comes from. I don't want to sound like I don't believe in accountability. I do think we're accountable. I do. I think accountability at its core is that ability to respond to make things better, a belief that you can kind of come back from something or whatever. So I think that's important that people still feel that. At the same time, I just think it's very immature to just blame people all the time for things. Um,
Well, that support network that you mentioned is a big one. I mean, how many
Huge.
people fall on their face,
I have a huge
but
extended family.
have a family that can pick them up?
This is how my family has always functioned. My mom's side of the family functions this way, so does my dad's side of the family. My dad's side of the family immigrated from Mexico. It was critical that everybody depend on each other. These multi-generation homes, like, we needed them. We needed that many contributing incomes. There needed to be grandma watching children, or there wasn't a way for her to hold a job. Like, this is how we functioned. My mom's side of the family, I grew up in a pretty poor family. My dad's side of the family, a little bit less so, but immigrants, and definitely dealt with, issues, because of when they immigrated. So I think, yeah, like, I have this network, right? Um, but I've seen what happens when people don't have these networks, and a lot of people don't. So,
You said something that kinda caught me off guard about your son
mm.
and recognizing that you have to have that support network for him. Was that a hard you said you adopted him when you were a little older in life?
Yeah,
Was
yeah.
that a hard decision to come to? Was it
No. So we had fostered kids off and on. We had no intention of adopting. We had years ago. My husband and I always said we would adopt and that kind of thing. But we didn't. We had two biological children, but we did foster care and stuff like that. But the focus of foster care is really about rebuilding those families, right? It's creating, very often those families, they don't have networks. They have problems. There's issues in there. Um, so we just did foster care. When we moved into this house in 2017, whatever. Anyway, we said, I was like, hey, this house is huge, right? Like, I just kind of had this, like, our kids are grown. This house is ginormous. There's, like, I grew up in, like, tiny kind of just dumps. And so I'm like, we got this big house, like, and I knew people, I have friends that had done foster care in the past. And they're like, we do not we have like 150 beds for the whole county. If you can believe it, that's how many beds there are for all the foster kids in Humboldt County. And we have a lot of foster kids. So it's like really problematic. So we were like, hey, let's do something, like, we'll just do it for a few years, is what we said. Like, we're just going to do this for like 3 to 5 years. And we said we were going to take older kids because we knew that what kids they were having trouble placing were older kids, because everybody's fine with little babies, but they don't want to deal with teenagers. And we're like, we've worked with teenagers for years. Like, we're good. Our kids are older. We're good. So the only reason why we got approved to even take young children, we said nobody under 4. We got approved was because when a teenage mom goes into care, like, say she gets taken from her parents, sometimes what can happen is somebody will take her baby but isn't willing to take that 15 or 16-year-old. And so it's just this. And I was like, that's awful. So I just kind of had this thought in my head, like, all right, we'll get approved. And I'm thinking, oh, we'll probably end up working. Well, we never ever had a single mom ever, like one of these teenage girls that we, placed with us. We did have teenagers and stuff like that, but then I don't even know what made them call us that day. We talk about this sometimes. We just marvel at it. Um, no intention of starting over. Like, we're older. Our kids are older. Like, we're about ready to, like, I don't know.
sit on a beach somewhere?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So we're like, um, so yeah, we had like, they were like, we have this little boy. He just came into the hospital. He was just born a few hours ago, blah, 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 you need to come down and be at the hospital with him for a few days. What do you think? And I put my hand over, like, the phone, and I was like, hey, to my husband, like, what do you think? And he's like, yeah, yeah. Again, not thinking we're gonna adopt, just like, all right, we're gonna go down there. But I don't know, there was just something. Got down to the hospital, like this tiny little peanut, tiniest little baby we'd ever seen in real life, right? Because he's exposed to everything. And so born early and with low birth weight. And so he's like barely 5 pounds, about 18 inches long, just tiniest little baby. We just fell in love with him. We fell in love with him. He was a safe surrender. I don't know if you know what that
I
is.
don't.
So, safe surrender is a law. It's called safe haven too. Basically, they can go into the first 2 weeks of life. They can go into a fire department or a police, police, whatever. Why can't I think what it's called? Police office. Anyway,
Police department?
police department. I'm like, what's the word? Anyway, or a hospital, and they can surrender these babies. They don't have to leave any information about them. And it's the reason why these laws were passed were to prevent abandonment of infants. Because, they were finding babies in bushes and
I did not know that was a
dumpsters and things
thing.
like that. Yeah, it's been a thing for a long time. As long as girls were trying to hide pregnancies, there have been babies that have been abandoned and died. So it was, and these laws were passed to basically, if for some reason this girl can't take care of this baby, no shame, give this baby someplace safe and walk away. And so they created these laws. So Finn was a safe surrender. So we know nothing about nothing. There's no records of anything about anything because they're allowed to walk in. And so I consider it a great act of love, honestly. I know a little bit. I know a little. I asked the doctor that was there. I said, I know you guys can't tell us any details, but anything you can tell me in case someday he asks me. And he said, she kissed him and told him she loved him. She couldn't keep him. And so I'm like, it's a huge act of love. So yeah. So we ended up keeping him. So no hesitation about adopting him, just more kind of like a, oh my God, we're old. Like ish. I don't know. So I mean, we're mid 40s. There's lots of people that have kids in their early 40s. It's not.
There's just that weird time thing, right? Where people, you have kids and then it's, you get them out of the house and you're done. You can go enjoy your
It's
life.
what
You
we
get your
did.
life back. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this was supposed to be a temporary thing. And, it's funny because I've talked to other people that have adopted children as well. The Maples family that I think
They've
owned Maples
adopted
Pond
quite a few of them.
quite a bit. And we were talking about that, just how kind of like there's like a, oh, we're just fostering, and then it's like, no, this is, that very often foster families don't necessarily think they're going to be adoptive families at the beginning, but you fall in love with these kids, you connect with them. I mean, this is not the only child we would have kept. So, yeah. I mean, just, they end up being your family.
Now, what is your take on the foster care system as a whole? Because I've always parroted that it's broken, and that just seems like the thing that people say, and I've fallen into that. But I've
Okay.
obviously never been a part of it, so it's a
It's
third perspective of, is it a broken system? You hear about these kids that are struggling through it. It doesn't sound like it's good.
it's not. It's a mess. No. Yeah, it's horrible. It was hard to even deal with as adults. As adults, we were like, "Ugh." I mean, there were just things you run into as adults working in the system. So I can't. And so we kind of kept going because we were like, as bad as it is to work with this system, imagine being in it, like you're in it as a kid. So, no, it's a mess. And it's not a mess because like every social worker we worked with was like, care a lot. High levels of burnout, right? For them too. That's a burnout job. It's hard. It's high pressure. They have high caseload here. Um, high caseload here. They see a lot of really sad things. It's rough.
Is it just a lack of funding? Does it tie back into the bureaucracy
There isn't
thing?
an you know what? There isn't enough funding in the world to patch together how collapsed some families have become. And we just have more and more of them. So
What do
because
you think?
of why do I think that's
Oh,
happening?
yeah, it's a big question.
I mean, hmm, I have like a lot of thoughts, right? Some I'm not I'm not going to share. But I think part of that is just generational trauma too. So and I've seen this even in my own family. Like I have my mom's family, I have a large extended family here, and there's some of the children have gone into foster care and some of my extended family and cousins and stuff like that. And I remember thinking, this is nutty. I could end up fostering somebody that I'm distantly related to and not realize it. You end up with these generational trauma things. Things get introduced. Like for my family, some of that stuff, it just kind of it keeps trickling through generations. Substance abuse can trickle through generations. Um, Alcoholism can trickle through generations, and mental health issues that are unaddressed, pressures of life. There's different things. Like with my own family, I feel like. Uh, I have a lot of people in my family that serve in the military, and then also family members that went to wars, and then family members that also that worked as sheriffs that are retired now. And I think people can experience a lot of trauma, and that kind of comes back, and it can break families.
Especially in those careers.
Yeah,
Those are the big 2 is the
it breaks
military and
people.
police.
It causes trauma, and that's something to remember too. Going back to homeless, a lot of those people on the street are veterans. There are things that people experience and see that makes things very difficult for them. I've seen people say, "Why are we giving this stuff to the homeless? Why don't we give stuff to the vets first?" And I'm like, one and the same. A lot of it is one and the same. You're looking at broken people. So I think that's kind of it. And then there's that whole, it is a thing. Intergenerational trauma is a thing. It's legit. I think people are like, want to kind of be like, oh, this is people not wanting to take accountability. It's not true. Um, that stuff, it passes in different ways. Um, Epigenetics. I don't know. That's kind of an interesting thing in and of itself. This kind of idea that's just like trauma is like stored in your cells. So, yeah.
Do you think any of that is tied to family values? That's one I've heard thrown out there a lot.
Okay. Well, I will say I value the family. I think families are like the key component, right, to a healthy society is a family. What I don't like is very often when people say family values is that they have a very specific idea in mind of what that family looks like. And it's very exclusive and it excludes lots of different kinds of families that they don't like for various reasons. Whether that's because they're LGBT families or whether they're, yeah, yeah, I
Not a
feel
fan of the family values
well, I
phrasing.
am. I mean, no, I'm not because
Yeah.
oftentimes it's kind of politically charged. And I think, like, again, I'm going to go back to being a foster parent. And I was raised by a single mom, and who was raised by a single mom because she was widowed, who was raised by a single mom. So, like, I think um, a family can look like a lot of different things, but at its core, it needs to be a, a unit that is got each other's back. And I think that's just not happening as much now. I think there's lots of reasons why that's coming apart. And but doing foster care and stuff like that, kids do not care. Like these, I mean, like I have this thing that I just post every few years, and it was a letter a little girl wrote about what she wanted for a family. And the list is so sad because the standards are so low, right? It's like, doesn't hurt my dog. Like it's things because of what they went through, a bed to sleep in, food to eat each day. Like the standard becomes so low because of what these kids go through and stuff like that. And I think, you know, um, so it really just like it irks me like when kind of like family values turns into this like what they mean is a mom and a dad, and it's like and we all believe a certain way and go a certain way and I'm like it's just um I think there's lots of different ways for a family to look, but a family has to I do think that they're critical. They're critical. Because even in the foster care system, what they do is they take them out of one that's not functioning and try to put them in another one that is functioning until possibly this can be repaired and there can be which is why I think we need to invest on people on the front end, right? That's part of it too. I feel like, whatever, investing in things on the front end rather than trying to patch over problems later on.
Well, yeah, that all ties back into fixing the problem at the root or at the
At
source
the root, at the source, right?
instead of just waiting to put a band-aid on it
My
down the
mom and I
road.
were broke. My mom and I were super broke. And I was hungry a lot. That is not a thing that kids have to deal with as much now. Good. Good. It's just yeah, let's fix it. And let's why not preschool? Why not pay for a preschool so someone can go back to work or go back to college and develop skill? Why can't we do that? Why can't we, help out with, food stamps and these other things in the meantime? It's food. Why not? Like I just yeah, it's better, right? There's certain things we can like kind of like go back from certain things, like the X number of kids that like end up in prison or juvenile hall as adults that they like we have this like list of things that happen. We know that they have high ACE scores, right? So like are there things that you can offset that? Well, high ACE scores are very directly related to poverty. There's different things, or doing poorly in school. Well, we can address that by like a robust supports at the beginning. Like there's all these things that you can kind of do at the front end that kind of starve off that sort of pipeline where like a kid just passes through the system and then because it's not cheap to imprison them later, I mean, I hate to say it that way, but for people who are like, oh, I don't want to spend this money on my tax money on these programs, I'm like, well, it's not cheap when they are suffering and having issues later on either. So I don't
Yeah,
know.
the more people we can keep out of prison, I think is just good across the board.
Or that are experiencing a mental health collapse because they didn't have the kind of supports that they needed early on too. So there's ways to kind of like interrupt those trains or whatever, however you want to put it. There's places where we can kind of intercede, and I feel like there's a lot of things that this county does really well. They do a lot of different things where they're trying to kind of like they're trying to interrupt those things, and they're succeeding in a lot of ways. Like so, like with my son, who's he's also on the spectrum, so he's diagnosed with autism when he was 18 months old, and among other things as well. And we have like this great early intervention system here because what they found is that they're like, if we get in there before 3 years old and we kind of work on all these things that don't come naturally to children on the spectrum, but they can learn if we get in there early and really work with them on it, that they see much better outcomes down the line, meaning that they, or, they can be in regular classes sometimes they can live independently. There's like all these different things that can happen. Um, there's states that don't have that. They don't fund it. They don't, it's just not there. They're like, they don't start until like they're 6 or 7 years old and they've lost all that time. So, I mean, like we have inside of California, we have high taxes, a lot of people complain about and that kind of thing. We also do have these systems and supports there that are doing things, but they're, like I was saying earlier, 10, 15, 20-year investments and things aren't today. You don't have like a big flashy thing that, is like,
People
oh, look
want
at,
that immediate
they want it
return.
right now. And it's like, but California is going to have a lot of children who have fared far better than children in some of these other states that do not have these supports that are on the spectrum. And that's something that's going to be, it's starting to be noticeable now. It's going to be very noticeable over the next 15, 20 years. Very noticeable
An increase.
that these children are doing better, that they're healthier, they're happier, that their families have, fared better. Because there are supports there. So again, it's like a front end thing. So I mean, like the homeless issue, right? I mean, like it is because all kinds of front end supports just failed, whether it was like family, whatever, like coping with, trauma, like a whole bunch of things just kind of failed for people to end up in that spot. I mean, I'm not saying that's not, oops, I talk with my hands. I'm not saying that's not on them too. I'm not saying like, oh, this guy was, loved partying in high school and turned into a burnout, got on drugs, whatever. Like I know that exists. So I'm not like, oh, there's
Yeah, it's
no,
not black and white, but
yeah, no, it's not
it's a
black and white.
cascading effect
Yeah.
sometimes.
And one of the things they know too is that like, even with like addiction, they're like some people, and James said this when you interviewed him. I was, he talked about how there's like some people will like, they'll do things and they won't have, it's not going to affect them like it's going to affect other people. Someone else is going to pick something up the first time and it's like, that's it. Their life is out of their hands at that point. And so, and some of that has to do with like coping strategies and trauma. People that have had trauma are more susceptible sometimes. So,
And sometimes it's just when it finds you in life.
yeah,
You could be in a bad place
that's what I'm
and
saying.
pick up the needle and you can't ever put it down
Well, and it
again.
doesn't usually start with needle. When we lived
Yeah,
out in
painkillers.
Yes, when we lived out in Utah, one of our, somebody that we knew, a fantastic guy, a fantastic family. He held it together up until he couldn't, but he had, been, abusing things for about 3, 4 years. New and new. I mean, there were starting to be little like cracks in the veneer, but he was holding it together. And how it started was he's a lawyer, working extremely long hours, was exhausted, and was starting to develop a lot of just body aches and pains. He's exhausted. He's sitting in weird positions. He's not sleeping like he should. People that aren't resting start to have symptoms similar to like fibromyalgia and stuff. You can really have some like really a lot of pain. Goes in, he gets this prescription. Oh God, that made me feel a lot better. Plus I can sleep. I just feel better. He talked about it like later. And then it just sent him on this path. It just kept going. So, and when California kind of did this, like, hey, we're going to tell these physicians that they can't prescribe these things, all of these people who were under physicians' care started looking for alternative ways to do this. I personally think that was a disaster. They should have kept him under physicians' care. They should have tried to kind of, because I think they just assumed, and they were, but there were doctors here, right? There's a doctor here that got censured because she has been trying to help those patients that got dumped by all these other doctors because they wanted to immediately protect their licenses. And she got all these pain management clients, and she's tried to help them with all these other methods of doing this and kind of tapering down and all these things. But it's a process. She got censured for trying to help all these people on that process. they incentivize these doctors dumping all of, so that's driven some of our drug epidemic as well, our illegal illicit drug epidemic as well, as people have turned to these other things that are just bad,
Way worse.
so much worse, but cheap and, desperate, and then they find themselves in a spot. I've seen that happen. I've witnessed it happen multiple times. I know somebody else that, got injured in construction, taking pills. And then eventually, I mean, it just kept going. He ended up in prison because he, didn't hold someone up with a gun. He held him up, I think, with a knife or something and was asking for their money. And it just blows my mind that this guy could ever end up in that spot, because it's just like here a little, there a little. So anyway, that's kind of a tangent, but I just think there's so much complicated that's going in there. There's so many things, such a long train of things going wrong, and for people to just, um,
Cut them off.
yeah,
Doesn't
sad.
seem like that was the right approach. I mean, you're legally getting people hooked on these pain meds, and then you just close the supply off.
Well, because they didn't want these doctors just prescribing them out like this,
Like they were.
like they were, it was like like they were dealing or something. It was bonkers. But yeah, and there are doctors who in California have said, "Hey," and there's people with chronic serious pain problems because of different kinds of diseases that also need to be able to legally control that pain. Like, they need to be able to be under physician's care because of, like, there's some pretty horrible things that can go wrong with the human body. So, anyway.
Yeah, if you got cancer, I'm taking the pain meds.
Yeah, and there's other things. I mean, there's certain types of, like, arthritis that just curls people up on themselves. I mean, just literally deforms all their joints. I mean, it's brutal. So there's different things that people end up with. Like, they need to be able to legally manage pain without, so there's just a lot that goes into this. This is what I'm saying. Or people who have uncontrolled anxiety. I mean, a lot of people, start self-medicating when they have these uncontrolled, they know that, shoot, they know people with ADHD, if it's not treated, sometimes will self-medicate in other ways. It's strange how, like, if somebody isn't able to address something, they kind of find
What they need somewhere else.
they do. A lot of people with ADHD self-medicate with caffeine without even knowing it. Like, they're undiagnosed, and it's just, "Oh, I just know I can focus a lot better if I drink caffeine." There are those people that pound down caffeine and then pass out an hour later, like, "Oh, sleep like a baby. It doesn't affect me at all." Yeah, well, probably have a different kind of brain, but yeah. 'Cause if I drink a Red Bull right before bed,
Cracked out.
I'm not gonna go to sleep. Yeah, I'm not gonna go to sleep. So, anyway.
So how do you think you solve I mean, that's not even how I want to phrase that question. What can be done to improve, you know, foster care just as a whole? Is it just people need to put a little more attention to it or put a little more effort behind? Because, like you said, you do have
Well,
these people that care, but there is that high burnout.
it's
And
yeah, well, right. So how do you prevent burnout? Well, you have a lot more staff, for one thing, right? So then the workload isn't so intense for each individual social worker. That's one thing. The county is doing things, though. I think they have some kind of mental health initiatives they are using with their own staff. I think there's some things that they're trying to do even with their own staff to kind of make sure that they're addressing kind of the needs of the staff, because that is a really hard job. It's a traumatic that can be a traumatic job, excuse me. Um and then improving it also, oh my god, there's so many people who are like, I could never do that, with, like, foster care. And I think, like, yeah, if you don't have the disposition to be with kids, like, for sure, just don't do it. But, like, do it. There needs to be more foster parents. That would relieve the system a lot here. They need to have more places for these kids to go. Because if you have more homes, then instead of having one home with 4 or 5 kids, then you can have a home with 2, and there can be a lot more individualized attention. So, more homes, more social workers, more supports for the families so they're not ending up in these situations. I would love to see kind of, we don't really have something like this, but what I wish we had is kind of like a, when you get these calls and they go out and they go, hey, and these cops say, hey, like, social services, you need to get involved. And it goes, and social services doesn't sometimes, or there's things because a variety of reasons. What I wish existed was before this child comes into the system, because once they're in the system, all of a sudden there's counseling for the family, there's this, there's that, there's all these things that all of a sudden come in. And what I wish kind of was more likely to happen was that when that process starts, that's when all that therapy and parenting classes and all those things start going so that maybe that kid never gets placed in the first place. Um, but again, you're compensating for gaps that were already there. So, because why might the parents not have parenting skills? Why might they, you're compensating for a problem that's there for some other reason. So, anyway, it's complicated, but I feel like what would help them is to have a bigger staff. And what would help them have a bigger staff is if they could pay better. So,
I think that's just across the board in a lot of things.
it is and
The
it isn't.
pay and the support of more employees.
It is and it isn't. I kind of feel like because there are things that are paid very well, but they are often not the things that are social workers, school teachers, daycare providers, um, and what is it? IHSS, which is home health services. So a lot of these positions that are working with children or disabled or these are paid poorly because they're like, eh. And I think it says kind of where our values are at a little bit. Like we don't really value this. And I think that's lousy. I think that's lousy. I think those should be pay matters. Like it really does. Pay matters. Um, yeah. One of our friends, he would work a job during the summer. He was a school teacher and he would work another job part time. It's just you
Yeah, the
shouldn't
school teacher
you
one is
shouldn't have
weird.
to do that. Like you shouldn't have to do that. You
Well,
should
especially as a teacher, we're entrusting you to teach children.
well, daycare providers, my God, these kids are like not even verbal, a lot of them. They're pre-verbal. Like we knew like this is really important. That's really important. Or uh people that are like my son who are mentally, are going to throughout his life, he's disabled. Like he's may never be able to tell me if somebody's treating him badly. He may not even realize or understand really what's happening. So it's like I really care about that stuff. Like so yeah, I mean, like there's supports that should be there. And we do actually have, I think, the money to do that kind of stuff because we pay other jobs well, but we don't pay necessarily those ones well. So, I don't know if it's necessarily, I think it's priorities. It's
I think
priorities.
that's a good way to
Why
sum
does
it up.
transportation pay so much more? I'm not knocking guys that are out working on a road crew or anybody working on a road crew. I'm just saying, why was that chosen for making more? Why does this one make more than that one?
Well, I don't think anybody's ever argued that the government is good at really allocating resources.
Yeah, no. So, but there's certain trends that just kind of across the board. So, yeah, I don't know. Yeah. I would like to, see that improve. That's not anything I can do running for city council.
Yeah, you kind of it's more of a small fish in a bigger
Yeah.
pond.
No, I mean, that's not anything that I can we got involved because we could do, I believe in working in your sphere of influence. I remember all those bumper stickers years ago, think globally, but act locally. But it's really true. You can have the biggest impact in your family, in your neighborhood, in your community. Those are your big impact zones. And so I feel like if you want to make things better, if you want to make the world a better place, go for your high impact. Like, where do you have the most influence? So,
Is that kind of your driving factor
yeah,
for running for the council?
yeah, yeah. Yeah. It's my neighborhood. It's my town. We moved back here. We discussed it. We moved into the neighborhood we do. We knew where we were moving. We knew that we would have some challenges for where we were going. But I was like, if everybody just pulls up stakes and goes, how do you make it work? Right? If everyone leaves and they don't come back,
It's not going to get any better.
no. And I'm like, so I'm like, yeah. And I mean, it's not like, I'm like, and I will save it. Not, no, not at all. But I mean, it's like, but as I've been out knocking doors and getting to know a bunch of people, like I know a lot of people on my street, but like I didn't know a lot of the other people, outside, and so I've been out knocking, talking to people. We have so many nice people. There's so many people just involved in doing so many little things that are making Eureka great, making it a good place. Like one lady we talked to, she makes these quilts and donates them. Like there's just so many like just nice people doing nice things for each other, you know. I think a lot of people in Eureka we're just really like cognizant of all the problems. Like everybody's just really aware of all the problems. And it's like, and that's part of it, right? You drive down the street and you're like, oh God. And it's like boarded up, boarded up, boarded up, a whole bunch of people on the side of the street. Yeah. I'm boarded up, boarded up, boarded, and so it's like we're seeing problems. And so I think it's like easy. And also too, I think like it's kind of, I don't know if this is like an American thing or whatever, but we just gotta like complain a lot. Like we just like we look at like problems and we just focus on them, you know. And I think it's very hard to get oriented towards solutions if you're just focusing on problems. Um, but I think it's also hard to solve problems if you won't look at the problems, if you just pretend they're not there. But we have a lot of good things going for us. There are a lot of very good people here. Um, and but they're going about their day, doing their little things, sewing quilts and giving them away and doing all, they're doing things, volunteering at the library. There's all these little, and so it's not like a big billboard. And so people don't know.
People don't see it.
They don't see it. So they don't realize that there's like so much good going on.
Yeah, it's easier to notice a problem, and it's easier to just call it out. Actually
It
trying to
is easy.
solve it is the hard work, and nobody wants to do that.
And tearing things down is even easier still. And I think, and criticizing people is so easy.
That's how I feel about we need to burn down society and rebuild it. When I hear somebody go off on that, I'm like, "Oh, it's not gonna work out how you think it is."
No, no. And I hear that, I mean, like, obviously, like, I've heard that kind of stuff. And, like, I get that. Like, I get the, like, frustration, stuff like this. But I'm like, hey, this is the best you've got. And I don't know if they really talk about this as much now. I mean, I've been out of school 30 something years, but I remember growing up, we'd always hear about, Abraham Lincoln was, you know, it's together we stand, divided we fall, like this idea. And I think like there's this like huge level of divisiveness, right? Whew, on a level I've never seen in my 46 years of life. I have never seen our country this divided, our communities are, I mean, I think it feels like it's just sent a crack right down the middle of just everything. And it caused problems with people's families too, where people just really, and people are, and you have people who are like, I want a civil war. And I'm like,
That freaks me out, almost more so than the people that wanna burn down society.
it freaks me out and it really pisses me off actually. So like, because I'm like, I have family that were served in wars. And I feel like a lot of these guys are like LARPers. And I'm like,
That's a great way to put it.
I'm like, you have no offense to the LARPers out there, but I'm like, but you have no idea how ugly and how horrible. And I don't either. And you know what? I don't ever want to know. And I'm like, no, it takes so much more work. Stop being lazy. Stop being a little brat. Stop complaining about everything all the time and sitting on the internet just complaining. Like, work with your neighbors, talk to your neighbors, get to know people, try to make things better. Like, we've already, they think it's going to, first, they're like, this is headed toward a civil war. Well, I would kind of argue that we've kind of had like a soft civil war this last few years. We've definitely, like, I mean, people don't even see things the same. They don't even see facts the same. So this is nothing like I've ever seen before. No, no, together we stand, for better or for worse. I mean, it's like, if you don't like how somebody is, I mean, like, it's the drunk uncle at the Thanksgiving table. I don't know. You deal with it. Find a way to deal with it. You don't just throw it all out. Like, you fight for your community, you fight for your family, you fight for your country. Like, you keep it going. Like, don't just give up. Like, there's so much good stuff still going on. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous.
I don't know. I've tried to articulate it on this podcast before, and I don't think I've done it justice. But the idea that we're just tracking along that divisive line, and it's just getting worse, and nobody wants to come together. Everyone wants to be divided into their own little box so they can be
Yeah.
victimized or have some excuse for whatever they need an excuse for.
Yeah.
And they don't want to come together, because if we come together, well, then we have to do work. We have to
Exactly.
ignore
Because then you
and
have
move
to
forward.
work.
Yeah.
Then you have to work. And it's so much easier to just say that other person is stupid or a villain
And just dismiss them.
and dismiss them than it is to talk with people. But this is your community family. That's your family. Like, no. Like, stop quitting. Stop quitting. What a bunch of quitters. Like,
And if shit hits the fan,
God, I hope it doesn't.
it's going to get people are going to be wishing for the days when they could just type on their phone that
Oh, yeah.
they were being oppressed, or that they hated life, and
Oh, I
that
know.
everybody sucks.
Well, and I think, but also too, I mean, like, I think a lot of people too are like, I don't want to hear about people's oppression. I'm like, I think part of that too is like, there are uncomfortable conversations that are happening right now that I think people kind of need to have though. Like, there is some of that I'm like, because that stuff, it was there, like, it was there. Like, there's things that were there. Like, I was talking, like, both sides of my family ended up in California because like my still living grandmother attended segregated schools, right? Like, she was segregated out and in Arizona. And they desegregated just the year before my dad was born. So this is like not ancient history. There were places they could not live, couldn't rent, They came out here, they became entrepreneurs because they couldn't get hired. This stuff has real impacts. Like it's a real, it does. And my husband and I talk about this, like we contrast it with like his experience and what his family just like, they talk about just like that generational wealth, right? And that generational just being established, just having it builds and builds and builds and builds, but we just weren't building anything for the longest time because we couldn't, in my family. So, um, my grandparents don't see that. My grandpa passed away last year. My grandma's still alive, but they don't see themselves as victims. But they definitely have experienced a lot of stuff. My dad did. My dad, I'm like, he's a proud guy, like patriot, served in the military, like, and he's experienced a lot of stuff, a lot of racism, I look just like him. I just came out really light, so I'm what they call, you know, white passing or white, I don't know, white presenting, whatever.
Whatever term they have nowadays.
Yeah, like, that's that, talking about, essentially that my phenotype and genotype don't match, what I am and how I look do not match. But yeah, like that, but that stuff is legitimate, like that's how my family ended up in California. Like my mom's side of the family, like they couldn't be hired. My grandma was left Toledo, Oklahoma. My grandma's family name is Rattling Ward. And she passed herself off as Portuguese, because it was like, well, that sounds kind of European, right? She didn't want to tell people she was Indian. So, and that's how they ended up here to try to, because California was kind of like, oh, it's the Wild West. We can do something out there. Like our kids can go to regular school. We might be able to live in a decent neighborhood, I feel like that stuff has an effect. And I think some of those conversations people are having are about that kind of stuff that you couldn't talk about before. I don't think we need to live in that all the time. And I definitely don't want to, my parents did not raise me to think of myself as a victim. I don't want to like wallow in the soup of that. But at the same time, like, I'm not going to pretend that that didn't have an effect on my family or that hasn't, like, I joke that I like the chip on my shoulder came naturally, but I'm like, yeah, there's like something there, right? Because like my family always had to kind of like kind of fight a little bit, kind of like really know who you are on the inside because other people are maybe telling you what you were on the outside. So
I think that's the approach that should be had. Recognition of what happened in the past, acknowledgement of the reality of what happened in the past,
yep.
but not the victim mentality. You can acknowledge the problems and acknowledge, hey, we still have a lot of shit we need to fix.
Yeah. I think what happens is that I can't believe we're talking about this. I'm never getting elected, but but I think like some of what happens is with this is that yeah, might as well, if I'm going to be here, let's just let it fly. But I'm like, yeah, I think my daughter and I have talked about this a lot. She and I talk a lot about this kind of stuff. My son's just kind of, like, nah, like he cares about a lot of stuff. But my daughter and I are both ones that are like, let's talk about this stuff, like. And she and I, the more people don't let people talk about things, the louder they get. And that's part of what's happening because, it's like right now people are like, for example, oh God, let's open this can of worms.
Oh, we're going in.
For example, sitting at the MMIP conference. You need to get that.
That was not me. That was the computer.
Okay, now the computer's interrupting.
Andy's over here messing around now.
But sitting at the MMIP conference, one of the
Andy, what are we doing here? We're trying to run a show, man. Oh, on the disc? Are we still...
It's still streaming, but...
Okay, keep it up. We might be at We're still good. Just computer problems.
I talked it to death. But...
So this can of worms, where are we going with this?
This can of worms. I forgot. Let's just move on.
No, we already opened it. So you and your daughter talk a lot.
We talk, yeah, no. So at the MMIP conference or MMIP summit.
And what is... Oh, that's the
Missing and Murdered Indigenous People. Sometimes it's MMIW, murdered or missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so either way, it's kind of talking about this disproportionate effect that's happening where these women are just vanishing. Trafficking is a large part of that too. So anyway, one of the things that they talked about, I literally lost my train of thought. It's like it's not meant to happen.
Oh, damn. That's what happens. We got our disk space.
Oh, no. Okay, so one of these young girls got up and she said, I want to see the education change. I want them to talk about us. And I was thinking about, okay, so that's in this room full of Native and Indigenous people and they're going, right? And that's how I feel too, right? Because like my family is just like, under the ground, right? Nobody talked about it. I didn't learn anything about, but my family's been here forever. And I like went through school and learned nothing, and, but she was talking about that. And I thought, I know that this is something that is becoming like a really big issue, right? That's being discussed on the news. This is the can of worms, right? But in third grade, so my family is, I said, from Mexico, and they're part Yaqui Indian, but they're also Yucatan Mayan. And so I remember learning in third grade here at Marshall Elementary, which no longer exists. We got to put all these things, and we are doing these ancient civilization projects, and we were working on these things. And I thought I was going to build this like Mesoamerican like temple, and I remember putting all my clay on it and just whatever. And we were talking about the Mayans, and they were like, "Yeah," and they just one day disappeared, and no one knew what happened to them. And there are still people who think that because that's what we were taught, right? Like, my family's alive. Like, they still exist. This is the problem with lousy, like, cruddy education that just sort of like snipped out everyone who was like Black, Indian, Mexican, whatever, Chinese, and just, boop, And so I think like that's one of these things right now that people are feeling like that screaming thing where people are kind of getting louder, because it's like the longer people aren't listening, the louder people get sometimes. And I think that's part of it. And I think that that's starting to make people feel really angry and upset. It's, I just think it's like, I think about it now as an adult. Like, at the time, I didn't think much of it as a kid. But as an adult, I look back on that and I think they literally taught us that, like, they just disappeared one day and nobody knew what happened to them. And I'm like, they're in my family. Like, it's such a weird
We
thing.
found them.
Yeah,
We're okay.
I found them. Yeah, it's such a weird thing. I don't feel like that's such a terrible thing that we maybe fix that.
Well, history as a whole is,
Written by the conquerors. It's written by the conquerors.
yeah.
It always has
Well,
been.
yeah, because the people that lose.
And so it says something interesting, I think, about America, that something special, actually, that we're like, maybe let's have this conversation. Is there a way to fix that? I feel like that's part of what's going on. It may be sloppy sometimes and it may be really messy, but I feel like they're trying to kind of maybe think like, how do we make this a more equitable situation? How do we make sure like everybody who might have a different perspective than me gets to sit at the table too and talk about it? How do we do that? I don't know. I mean, that's kind of the gist of equity, right? Like, how
Well, one
does
of the
everybody
things,
have a seat?
yeah. I mean, one of the things I love about this country, and it kind of bums me out when people just blanket shit on America,
Yeah, me too.
is that at least we can have these discussions. Because in other countries, you're not going to be around you're not going to have the conversation. You're going to start talking. I mean,
Yeah.
you can see that with, what is it, Iran right now that's having all those protests?
Yeah.
Like, I don't know if people just don't travel, which is understandable because it's expensive, but you can go on your phone and you can see these other things and see how other places in the world are.
Yeah.
It's not like America.
No.
I mean, there's some rough places out there. And
And
I know I always have to counter that by saying it's not great here. We do have things we need to work on,
totally. But we can.
but we
But
can't.
we
We
can.
even have the option to bring it up and say, "Hey, this is a problem.
We can.
We should address this."
All the time. All the time. It happens all the time. And in California, there are things that make it onto the ballot. There are things that like all the time. Like the ability to complain and to change things because you're mad about it is like so very kind of uniquely American in that way. And I mean, there's other people with our forms of government. There's other, I mean, there's like, we're not the only like democracy, or I guess we're kind of like a democratic republic, but I mean, like, yeah, but yeah, there's something special. Like, that's why I'm like, don't throw this away. Like, this is giving, don't be so quick to like it. But again, it's hard. It's hard when you're aware, and especially when, some people are very focused on trying to fix certain things. And I'm not going to begrudge people that are like focused in one area, because like you need those people that are focused in one area, because I don't personally have time to focus in one spot. Like, I tend to kind of go across, right? Like a lot of little things. And like if I get elected, that's what I'd be doing, is trying to work on like lots of things. But those people that get really focused and they're living and breathing some kind of issue every day, they're just like way more aware of it. I think they are more likely to complain about the stuff because like they're in it. They're in the soup. I think that kind of colors things for them. And so I think always kind of like maybe being charitable about some of the people who are really frustrated about things too, because like they're experiencing some things maybe firsthand that I'm not, So um yeah, like they have that, they're making things, yeah, I don't know. But I do think I worry about the level of like negativity and discouragement that's surrounding like younger people. I can't remember what it said, the amount of people, youth that have reported in California that they're in like a state of kind of mental health crisis, but it like blew my mind. It's like a third or something, or a third that was feeling okay. I don't know.
Either way, not
it
great.
was too high. And I think part of that is because like, yeah, we do focus a lot on like what's going wrong, or we focus a lot on, and there are a lot of people. I don't know if you know what ACEs is.
Yeah, it's like a trauma score,
Yeah,
a
adverse
representation.
childhood experiences score.
Yeah.
But there's a secondary component to that, and that's resiliency. And I think we need so badly to be focusing on resiliency individually, as a community. When you're working with kids in foster care, you're focusing on resiliency. Is like, how do you help someone learn how to bounce back, keep coming back, don't give up? And you really have to have that in anything that you're doing in your life, is you have to. And what happens is people get so over traumatized, they don't bounce back. That goes back to that, you know, back to groups of people that end up, homeless and these other things. Sometimes the trauma just is too much. People don't come back, but I think helping other people kind of spring back. We need hope.
That's what we
We
need.
need hope.
We
Things
need to
can be
come
better.
together and believe that it can get better.
It can get better. It can get better. My goodness. Oops. I grew up in the 80s. They told us to get underneath our desks in case Russia nuked us.
And look at where we are now.
I know.
We're right back in that spot.
And here we are again. So, but my point is, it didn't happen last time. Probably won't happen this
God,
time.
I hope so. I get worried when
You
I
either
dig
hope
into
that it doesn't happen or that you're really close to the blast. So those are
Yeah.
You don't want to be out in that outer.
Yeah. Mad Max.
Right. No, but I think I feel like what's changed though is that with the way that news works now and with social media, I think everybody and younger groups are able to be traumatized on a level that we weren't. The news came twice a day when I was a kid, and it was like local news. And that was really it. I had no way to see that someone was beaten to death in New York. I had no way. And now we can the amount of collective trauma that can come just is
It's in your phone. It's in your pocket all day.
much, all the time. And on very impressionable minds, your brain doesn't even stop. Your brain is really neurologically, you're still developing until about 25. And so I think that's a lot. It's a lot to be bombarded with. And I think people are feeling very hopeless, but there's lots of reasons to hope. There's lots of reasons to hope. This isn't new. I mean, I have the benefit of having this large multi-generational family, and they went through horrible things too. They went through terrible things that they thought was the end of the world too, but it wasn't. And that they thought would be the end of the country, and it wasn't. Or the end of their family, and it wasn't. And so we can get through it. We have lots of reasons, and Eureka can be better too. It was before, it can be again. There's lots of things that we have to build on, but it really starts with hope, right? Because you kind of have to have a vision of where things can go, or you don't try. And so I think, yeah, kids need hope. Things are going to be okay. This is a weird time, but people are going to keep going. They're going to get married. They're going to have kids. They're going to make the world a more equitable and kinder place. Businesses will come and go. We don't even know where it's going to go.
As long as we don't start dropping nukes, I think we could be okay. If the nukes start coming out, it's going to be a rough road.
Yeah. And, there's not, Putin is, there's, I don't know. Does he have anything to lose? We got to hope so.
I don't know.
I don't know. But I think, is it going to happen? I don't think so. And even if it does, it's not going to be the end of the world.
Well, depends on how many they drop.
Depends on how many they drop and how big. But again, I mean, like, I just
Optimistic.
optimistic. Yeah. Because I mean, really being negative, maybe it will or maybe it won't. The things that you dread, maybe they're going to happen, but maybe they won't. But you're kind of like stealing a moment from yourself and thinking about it right now because there's all kinds of things you can be doing and building. And I think in the meantime, I think everybody don't focus on that. Don't focus on that. Build, create your life, like
That's a good
make your
perspective to
life,
have.
and tomorrow wake up and do it again. Because the thing you worried about yesterday may or may not have happened. And here you are again today. So it's like, just keep going. And I think, yeah, I want people to work together. Um, I think it's pretty well known that, some people were like, I think she was a Republican. I wrote this article that went viral.
I was going to ask you about
Yeah.
that.
I wrote an article that went viral. 2017. And because I was a registered Republican. And I think people are like, oh, then she's MAGA. No, never. So
Well, I mean, you marched with the Women's March.
I did, of course. Yeah, absolutely. I
It's tough
volunteered.
to be
I
MAGA
volunteered
and do that.
I volunteered with Planned Parenthood when I was 15. Like, no, I have my views. I voted for Ralph Nader in 2004. I'm an independent person who thinks independently. So we exist. But yeah, no, I was a registered Republican in my family, and this is going to sound funny to people, but all the couples, one person would register Democrat, and the other would register Republican, and that way you would get materials on both, and they could feel like they were active in primaries. But there are things like self-determination and like, hey, like, let's do this, and not thinking of yourself as a victim, or different things that I'm like, yeah, that like kind of appealed to me about some of that ideology. But I mean, it's just been off the rails for so long. It really has. It's just been off the rails for so long. And by the time I wrote that, I probably really I wasn't trying to be disingenuous, but I really, really didn't belong as a Republican in it. And that was really kind of it for me. That was kind of the last straw. Is I kind of wrote that kind of hoping that I would appeal to a lot of these other people that I am friends and family with, to be like, hey, think this through, because this could really be a disaster. And it didn't work. And so, not really. I think there's a lot more pro-choice conservatives than people realize, and pro-choice Republicans, a lot of women. So
Well, it's easy to, going back to that typecasting thing, you
Yeah.
hear Republican and you slam them in that box and you can write them off that way. Oh, you're just a Republican.
Yeah.
You don't care about women. You
Yeah.
don't care about these things.
yeah, they don't care about women. And it's like, wait, but they are women, or they're like, and they're, this, and you're like, they're white. No, well, actually she's, Latina, or actually she's black. I mean, it's like people are complicated. They're not easy to put in boxes. No, never MAGA, did not vote for Trump. And that was really when I was like, yep, this is not the party for me anymore. Because no. So,
When you wrote that letter kind of laying out
it was
why it would be pro-choice.
You know what? I didn't write that as an article. I wrote it as a comment that was sent in a private message to the lady that runs that page, Women You Should Know, and said, hey, I really appreciate what you guys are doing. And I just said, and I just kind of said, this is so frustrating. I wrote this kind of, what I couldn't say to everybody else, but then I ended up saying to everybody else.
Did you know she was going to put that out there?
Yeah, she asked for permission. She said, can we please publish this? And I was like, sure. Thinking like 400 people read it maybe. And it just went around the world. So, because there were marches happening all over, right? Outside the country too. And so it is just ping ponged everywhere. And so, I mean, I've always been an independent thinker, and
there's pros and cons to both sides. And the idea that you have to pick one and have to conform to all of their ideologies.
I'm a registered independent right now. And I don't see myself, and I vote entirely for Democrats at this point, and have for 6 years. So, but if I thought somebody was, I can't imagine myself, I'll be perfectly honest, I can't imagine myself voting for a Republican right now. I've never down ballot voted, but I have the last while, because I really felt Trump posed an existential threat. I really was concerned. And I was kind of like trying to kind of raise this call in like 2015 when I was like, no way, this isn't where they're going with this, right? No way. Oh, it is. Okay. And then in 2016 was like, I mean, we're not going to vote for this guy, right, guys? Right, right. And then he's elected, and I was like, okay, yeah. So and I think at that point I started realizing, and I mean, I have family members that voted for him that thought it was a joke too. They were just like, they just didn't want to vote for Hillary Clinton, but they were like, this clown, right? And so it was weird to kind of watch them. Like, the more people criticized him, the more people ragged on them, the more they like really dug in, and they were like, yeah, he's our guy. And I was like, what is happening right now? Like, what is this? Yeah, very concerning. Typically pre-Trump, I always just felt like corporate politicians really kind of serve corporate groups. They really, the powerful serve the powerful. Like, I just always kind of, I don't know if that's like a jaded way to look at things, but I just felt like they were kind of like out of touch with all of us. And I felt like there wasn't like vast differences between the two parties. And that could be very wrong, but that's how I used to feel. That really changed with him. Because I was like, this is frightening. So I really was concerned and wrote about 2016, 2017. I was like, surely you realize this is the kind of person who never leaves office willing. Like, they're going to have to pull this guy out. Like, he's going to be like dragging his nails along the wall. And people are like, no, that's not going to happen. Well, I don't know.
I know a lot of people that felt that way.
I
They were
did.
worried.
Yeah, I was like, he's not going to go willingly. No way. There's no, you could, votes could have been 3-1. He wasn't going to go. I think they really underestimated too, because a lot of people were like, no way. He couldn't possibly have been elected. Nobody'd vote for Joe Biden. Oh, there's a lot of us that voted for Joe Biden. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I was still a registered Republican when, so I just, yeah. Anyway, whatever.
What are your odds if it's Trump versus Biden 2024?
Oh, who do I think is going to win?
Yeah.
I still think people are going to they may do it quietly because they don't want to make everybody mad, because that was a thing, right? A lot of people were just quiet in 2020, and they're like, they couldn't have possibly voted for Biden. I didn't see any flags. And I'm like, well, maybe they just weren't flaggy people, like they just weren't the sort to put a big flag in the back of the pickup truck. I think it would be, I'm disappointed that we have two very old people
I know we
running.
need some better candidates.
And I don't regret voting for Joe Biden. I don't regret it. I wanted things to calm down, and I wanted the rhetoric against people that share an ethnicity with me to calm down, like, enough. Like, it was just too much. And there was just so much that was just so toxic. So no regrets, but God, there were so many good people, like, too. I'm like, I really liked Cory Booker. There was some great candidates, and I'm like, how are these people not making it? How are we the same people that are in control in Congress right now are the same people that were in control 30 and 40 years ago. These people just never left.
Nancy Pelosi.
And they're in there,
Still
like,
just up there.
up
holding on to
there.
power.
It's they're just up there, and it's not because there aren't good people in these younger generations. There are. And I'm like, and I don't like ageism either, because, like, I served on the civil grand jury in 2019 and 2020. And I worked with a lot of retired people, and they may take a little bit more time to get to their thoughts, but their thoughts are very quality. And so I have kind of a different attitude on that too, because I feel like, again, it's kind of a cultural thing, but in my family and the background I come from, you really value your elders. You really see them as a source of wisdom, that they have, like, they're grounded in a way that maybe, like, when you're young, you're not, because you're super just like got the energy. You don't slow down and really, like, think about things in the same way. And so I'm like, I really hate to kind of see that, like, that being the reason for people being like, no, I don't want these people. They're old.
Well, I think it's ageist for some, absolutely. But then you do look at Biden and you think, this guy he's not as well put together as you would want the president to be.
Yeah. And sure. But I think if my choices are, complete chaos and someone who's really willing to probably burn things down just to, watch it burn, versus maybe someone who's just, saying strange things or is taking a while to get to a thought. I'm like, I can't believe those are my choices. But yeah,
it's sad. It's sad that's where we
one
are.
option, no, I would never consider Trump. And it's no bash or criticism to anybody else. I think that a lot of people think that everyone who's voted for Trump has to be MAGA. No. There are a lot of people that just voted that direction because they just weren't comfortable. they're not as
It's nuanced.
it's
I know a lot of
nuanced. It
people that
is more
voted for Trump that are good people,
Yes, me
that
too.
aren't racist, that
Me
aren't
too.
terrible people.
Yeah, me
They
too.
just didn't like Biden, or they liked, different monetary like you
Yeah.
can like somebody and not like their actions or like what they're.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of people were like. Where I kind of started to get really creeped out was just how there was kind of a move to like start really like acting like Trump was sort of like some sort of like deity or something. That was really starting to like unnerve me and alarm me, the way that like some people kind of went all in on
QAnon.
kind of a mass delusion. Yeah, I was like, you know, I've worked in government. I sat on the civil grand jury and we investigated a bunch of things. And I can tell you, it is so hard to have a conspiracy. It is so hard. And the bigger the conspiracy, the less likely that it's true, because you have so many people involved and people are already so ineffective sometimes at just doing their job. The idea that they're like, some of it's just no, no. So there's like the deep state. Who is that? Like, I just don't think it's healthy to have someone up there that's spreading that kind of, it's free speech. Say what you want, but it's not healthy, because there are costs to things. You can really like Alex Jones, right? Like, there's costs to that. Those families were harassed and just targeted for ages. Like, there's costs to free speech too. Like,
I think his cost is $1 billion. I think that's what he just got
it's just
slapped with.
Yeah, and
which is crazy.
That's so hard to even comprehend.
$1 billion.
Yeah, at that point we're into Bezos bucks. Like, I don't know how to measure that. Like, that's not even, it's incomprehensible. Yeah, he'll never pay that. I don't even know.
I don't know how much money he's bringing in with his
I don't know
show,
either.
but I can't imagine
It's a lot.
$1 billion.
No, I don't think it's $1 billion either, but it's a mind-boggling sum of money that he.
That's how much he brings in. Was fine. Okay, I thought you were saying he
I
brings
was
that in a year.
like,
I was like, whoa. Andy, we got to start
Yeah, I
pivoting
know. I
on
was
the
gonna
show.
say, keep going at it. Start talking
Wow.
about frogs or something. I don't know.
Jesus.
Like,
Lizard people, that's where we're going. Next podcast, we're going to get somebody on.
right? Yeah. Start talking about conspiracy theories,
man.
strange things in the water. The frogs are changing. Like, go there, make life.
It's just a crazy time. It is just a crazy time.
Yep. I'm very worried about it. And I don't want people to give up on each other. I don't want them to give up on their family members. And I want them to give up on their friends and their neighbors.
That's the takeaway.
I don't want that to happen. It's happening and people need to stop. They have to fight for each other. They do. And that was not like, that was something I loved about growing up here. Like, after I left and I went other places, like, I was really proud of this place that I grew up, where there were so many different kinds of people, and that we all just, I lived in Texas and it was like, and here are the poor people, and behind the gate over here are the rich people. I was so freaking divided in so many different ways. And I was just like, this is, and not everywhere. I mean, like, Texas is awesome. There's some great people down there. My husband's whole family's from there, but not like Eureka, where you can have like rich, poor, rich. I mean, just walking down the street, it's just so mixed up, right? And I was like, I love that about here. And that, and it's kind of Wild Westy here, right? Like, there's kind of like a rebellious streak, like a rebel vibe that kind of runs through like everybody, right? Like, there's a really like big independent streak here, which I think is great. I think that's why we can be creative about how to solve problems here too. But we just have to have the energy and the fortitude to do it, and and be hopeful. There has to be hope. So it's a fun opportunity to be running. It's definitely just in a couple of months. I threw my hat in the ring at the last day that you could say you're going to run. And so I think Nicholas, who's my opponent, was like, hang on, like, wait, what? Like, I've been doing this for like 6 months. Anyway. And so I've been having to like run this like intense thing for like 2 months, just super intense, because I only have 2 months, or, like 2.5.
So you kind of had to hit the ground running.
I did the ground running, and it was like, I always serve behind the scenes. I don't get out in front of people. Like, I'm just always kind of like, I haven't in years, not in 20-some years. I just always am like, it's more comfortable. It's more comfortable. Leadership out in front, lots of criticism. More comfortable just to like help people out from behind the scenes. And then they're just, grateful for your help. It's not like you're just always ticking off half of everybody, right?
Yeah, you cannot please everyone.
You can't please everyone. You can't, there's no way to do it. And there's Yeah, and I'm not easy to put in a box. Is I'm confusing people a little bit.
I don't think that's a bad thing. I
It's
don't think that's a bad thing.
as I've talked with people, everyone that I feel like it's a good thing that all the people that I've talked with, if they've had a talk with me, they're like, all right, yeah, how do we do this? Like, how do we support you? So I feel like I think some of my views, and I lean progressive, like for sure. Like I definitely have a more progressive view of things, absolutely. And progressives kind of outnumber conservatives here, like 4-1. But I'm like, but I've got conservatives that are supporting me as well, and they know I am not, and they know that I am very left leaning, and they're still supporting me. So, so it'll be interesting to see how this shakes down. I think part of that is because I'm like, I will talk with anybody.
That's
Yeah,
a good quality to have.
yeah. I don't want to. I don't like I don't want any more division. So I'm like, it starts with us. Fight for it. So
Well, there you go. Renee, we can end it on that. It's already 5:10.
yeah.
Do you want to plug where people can find you, where they can find your campaign?
Yeah, so you can find me on Facebook. I made myself go onto Facebook, so I'm there now. I'm on Facebook. I don't have a website. And then you can reach me through Gmail. So on Facebook, it's like at RCD for our city. So there you go. Or you can just look up Renee Contreras-DeLoach, and find me that way. So I think it's Renee Contreras-DeLoach for Eureka Fifth Ward, I think is how it says it on Facebook. But literally, it's like the little handle. Oh, and I'm on Twitter, which is also at RCD for our city. And same thing with Gmail, same thing, RCD for our city. So
Okay.
yeah, that's where I'm at.
Well, Renee, that was awesome. Thank you. Thanks for
Yeah,
coming on. I had a great
thanks.
time talking with you.
Yeah, it was fun. I
Good.
kind of forgot that I was running, and so
Yeah, there you go.
Uh-oh.
We won't hold you against that. Yeah, you'll be fine. All right. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.